You pop the hood, you see a plastic box, you think, this is going to be a 5-minute job. And it can be. But there's a weird little trap with the Suzuki Swift that turns a simple air filter swap into a car that suddenly idles rough, feels sluggish, or starts making a faint hissing sound you've never noticed before. Not because the filter is wrong in some dramatic way. Because of one small detail, the seal. So if you're here for air filter replacement on Suzuki Swift, the goal isn't just to get a new filter in there. The goal is to make sure every bit of air the engine breathes actually goes through that filter, not around it. That's the difference between maintenance done and why does my car feel worse than yesterday. First, a quick clarity check, because this is where a lot of people waste time and money. When people say air filter, they might mean the engine air filter, or they might mean the cabin filter for the AC and heater. The cabin filter lives inside the car, usually behind the glove box area. The engine air filter lives under the hood in the airbox connected to the intake tube. Today is only the engine air filter. If you bought a filter and it looks like a thin rectangle with a flimsy frame and it's sized like something that would fit behind a glove box, that's probably the cabin filter. The engine filter is usually thicker, more rigid, and built to seal inside a plastic housing. Now, do you actually need to replace it right now? Sometimes yes, sometimes it's just a reminder sticker or a habit from a service schedule that assumes average conditions. If you drive on dusty roads, do lots of construction zone commuting, or you're often behind trucks kicking up grit, you'll need it sooner. If you mostly drive clean paved roads, it can last longer. The point is, don't guess based on time alone. You're already opening the box, so you'll be able to see the truth in about 2 minutes. Tools and time. Most Suzuki Swifts let you do this with either no tools at all, or a basic screwdriver or small socket depending on whether your airbox uses metal clips or screws. Plan for 10 to 15 minutes the first time, because the first time is when you're learning where things are and how the lid wants to open. After that, it really can be a quick job. Here's the mindset that prevents the common mistakes. You're not wrestling a stubborn part of a car. You're opening a plastic box that needs to seal perfectly when you close it. That means no forcing, no over-tightening, and no good enough when the lid looks slightly crooked. Plastic airboxes crack, clips snap, and stripped screws happen when people treat this like a heavy mechanical job. It's more like closing a food container. If the edge isn't seated, it leaks. Let's find the airbox. Open the hood and look for a black plastic box with an intake tube coming out of it. That tube runs toward the engine. On many Swifts, the airbox sits toward the front side of the engine bay, often near the battery area, but layouts vary by year and engine. Don't worry about matching a specific diagram. Use the rule that never fails, follow the intake tube. The tube that carries air toward the engine has to come from the airbox. That box is your target. Before you open anything, take a second and look at how the lid is held on. Some have spring metal clips around the perimeter. Others have screws, sometimes a mix of screws and tabs. If you see clips, you flip them up and off. If you see screws, you loosen them carefully and keep them somewhere safe. If the screws feel like they're turning but not coming out, don't panic. Some designs use captive screws that stay in the lid. You just loosen them until the lid releases. Now, here's a small but important habit: try not to yank the lid straight up like you're opening a treasure chest. Many airboxes have one side that hinges or hooks under a lip. If you pull the wrong direction, you can flex the plastic and make it harder to reseal later. Instead, once the clips are undone or screws loosened, gently lift the lid and see which side wants to come free first. If it feels like it's still attached, it probably is. Look for a tab or a corner that's still tucked in. As you open the airbox, think about what's sitting inside. Dust, leaves, sand, tiny bits of grit. If you lift the lid abruptly, that debris can fall into the clean side of the box, and from there it can get pulled into the intake when you start the engine. That's why slow and controlled matters. With the lid open, you'll see the filter sitting in a rectangular recess. Before you pull it out, look at how it sits. Notice the orientation. Some filters have a rubbery gasket edge. Some have a foam seal. Some have a rigid frame that fits only one way. You're going to copy that orientation with the new one. Now remove the old filter by lifting it straight up. If it's snug, wiggle gently. Don't scrape it along the edge more than you have to, because you don't want to knock dirt off the dirty side into the clean side. Once it's out, hold it dirty side down for a moment. If you tap it or shake it, you'll make a dust cloud and you'll also dislodge debris that can end up where you don't want it. Also, a quick word about the classic, I'll just blow it out with compressed air. With paper filters, high-pressure air can tear or separate the filter media in ways you can't easily see. It might look cleaner and still filter worse. If you're already here and you have a new filter, replace it. Now inspect the airbox itself. You're looking for two things, loose debris and the sealing surface. Loose debris is anything sitting in the bottom of the box, sand, leaves, dead bugs. You want that out. The safest way is to gently pick out larger bits by hand and use a clean cloth to wipe the bottom. If you use a vacuum, keep it controlled and don't jam the nozzle into delicate edges. If you use a cloth, make sure it doesn't shed lint. The goal is simple, nothing loose that can get sucked toward the engine on first start. Then look at the rim where the filter seals. This is the part people ignore, and it's the part that decides whether your engine breathes filtered air or not. If there's a line of dust or grit on that rim, the new filter's gasket can't sit flat. That can create a tiny gap. Tiny gap, big consequence, unfiltered air bypasses the filter. Over time that means more dirt in the intake tract. In the short term it can also mean odd noises or a slightly unstable idle if the lid isn't seated evenly. So wipe the sealing surface. Not aggressively. Just clean enough that the gasket has a smooth, consistent surface to press against. Now compare the old filter and the new filter. They should match in length, width, and thickness. The frame should look the same. If the new one is slightly different, don't force it. A filter that almost fits is exactly how you end up with a leak. If you're unsure, stop and verify the part number for your exact Swift variant. This is one of those moments where 5 minutes of checking saves you from weeks of wondering why the car feels off. Okay, installation. This is where the whole job is won or lost. Place the new filter into the recess the same way the old one came out. It should drop in without bending. If you have to bow it or compress it hard, something's wrong filter, wrong orientation, or it's not aligned with the recess. Once it's in, run your eyes around the perimeter. You're checking that the filter frame is sitting flat and level. No corner should be popped up. No edge should be riding on top of a lip. If the filter has a gasket, it should look evenly compressed when the lid goes on, not pinched on one side and loose on the other. Now close the airbox lid carefully. This is not the moment to press down in the middle and hope the edges follow. Instead, guide the lid into its tabs or hinge points first, then lower it evenly. If your airbox has a side that hooks under a lip, make sure that side is fully engaged before you try to latch the clips or tighten screws. If you skip that and just clamp it down, you can warp the lid slightly and create a gap you won't notice until later. If you have clips, latch them one by one while keeping gentle pressure on the lid near the clip you're closing. If a clip doesn't want to close, don't force it. That's your signal that the lid isn't seated or the filter is slightly misaligned. Open it back up, reseat the filter, and try again. A clip that closes only with brute force is a clip that's about to snap, and it still might not seal correctly. If you have screws, tighten them snug, not heroic. Plastic threads strip easily. The lid doesn't need to be crushed to seal, it needs to be evenly seated. If there are multiple screws, tighten them gradually rather than fully tightening one and then moving to the next. That helps the lid settle evenly. At this point, pause and do a simple visual check. Look all the way around the seam where the lid meets the base. You want a consistent gap, ideally almost no visible gap at all, and definitely no corner that looks lifted. If you can see a section where the lid isn't flush, that's the one small detail that can make the car run worse. Fix it now while you're standing here, not after you've driven away. Now, before you start the engine, make sure you didn't accidentally disturb anything around the airbox. The intake tube should still be connected and not cracked. Any small hoses or connectors near the airbox should be where they were. You're not doing sensor cleaning here, but you are making sure you didn't bump something loose. Start the engine and listen. Most of the time, you'll notice nothing, and that's a good sign. The engine should idle normally. What you don't want is a new loud sucking sound, a whistle, or a hiss that changes when you lightly rev the engine. Those sounds can indicate an air leak at the airbox seam or intake tube connection. If you hear something new, don't ignore it and hope it goes away. Shut the engine off and recheck the airbox lid seating and the intake tube connection. Also pay attention to how the car feels on a short drive. A fresh filter can make throttle response feel a bit smoother if the old one was really clogged, but don't expect miracles. If it suddenly feels worse, that's another clue that something isn't sealed right. Again, the fix is usually simple: reopen, reseat, close evenly. This is the moment to mention a common confusion. People sometimes think the filter has to look filthy to be repaired. But a filter can be restrictive without looking dramatic, especially if it's loaded with fine dust. On the other hand, a filter can look a bit grey and still be fine. The real reason to replace is either you're at a reasonable service interval for your conditions, or you can see heavy dirt buildup, leaves, or damaged pleats, or the filter media looks oily or deformed. If the old filter has tears, holes, or the gasket is damaged, it's not a maybe. Replace it. And if you're tempted by the idea of washing or oiling a reusable filter, be cautious. For most daily driven cars, the simplest and safest approach is a standard replacement filter that fits correctly and seals properly. The biggest performance gain you can get from this job is not more airflow at any cost. It's correct filtration with no bypass leaks. Now, let's talk about the mistakes that cause the most frustration, because they're sneaky. The first is buying the wrong filter because you mixed up engine and cabin. The second is installing the engine filter slightly out of its recess so one corner sits high. The third is closing the lid while the filter edge is pinched, which creates a gap. The fourth is over-tightening screws until the plastic deforms. And the fifth is leaving debris in the airbox so the first start pulls it toward the intake. If you avoid those, air filter replacement on Suzuki Swift is genuinely one of the easiest DIY maintenance jobs you can do, and it's a good confidence builder because it teaches you how to work carefully with plastic housings and seals. A quick note on model differences, because someone will open their hood and think, mine doesn't look like that. Some Swifts have a very obvious airbox with multiple clips. Others have a lid that's partially tucked under a snorkel or intake duct. Some have screws that are a bit hidden. The method stays the same: follow the intake tube, open the airbox without forcing it, keep dirt out of the clean side, seat the new filter flat, and close the lid evenly. If something goes wrong, here's how to troubleshoot without spiraling. If a clip breaks, the airbox may not seal properly. Sometimes you can replace the clip or the airbox top, but if the lid can't be held down evenly, you're risking unfiltered air getting in. If a screw strips, don't keep tightening it until it spins freely, that just makes it worse. If the airbox itself is cracked, that's not a tape and forget situation for the long term, because heat and vibration will work against you. And if you get a warning light right after this job, don't assume the filter caused it directly, but do recheck that you didn't disturb a connector nearby. If the light persists, that's when it's smart to get it scanned rather than guessing. One more practical tip: keep the old filter for a day or two, especially if you're not 100% sure you bought the correct replacement. If you discover the new one doesn't fit perfectly or you notice an issue, you can temporarily reinstall the old one while you sort out the correct part. Just don't run without a filter, and don't run with the airbox open. The engine needs that sealed path. And when you're done, take a final look around the engine bay. No tools left behind. No loose screws. The airbox seam looks even. The intake tube is secure. The engine sounds normal. That's it. Simple, but only if you respect the seal. Because that's the real twist with this job: the filter itself is just a piece of paper in a frame. The airbox is what makes it work. Get the seating right, and you've protected your engine and kept airflow consistent. Get it slightly wrong, and you've created a bypass that defeats the whole point. So if you did the swap and everything feels normal, you nailed it. If anything feels off, don't overthink it. Reopen the airbox, reseat the filter carefully, clean the rim, and close it evenly. In most cases, that's all it takes to turn a "why is my Swift acting weird" moment back into a clean, quiet, properly breathing engine. And that's the difference between rushing through air filter replacement on Suzuki Swift and doing it like someone who knows what actually matters.